It was getting late. Diana didn't know how late, but it was too damn late for anyone to be calling. She hoped it was Marty's phone and not hers. Either way, she just covered her face with a pillow and gave thanks when the ringing stopped after 5. And then she was just getting comfortable when the ringing sounded again. "Damn it," she exclaimed, opening her eyes again. "Martin, answer your damned—" The words were suddenly cut short when she realized her husband wasn't beside her in bed. She glanced at the clock. 3:37. Picked up her phone from the nightstand and wondered why her husband wasn't in bed. After all, he had been there when they went to bed hours ago. "Yes, hello, hello," she muttered into the receiver. "Is this Diana Miller?" "Yes, yes, that's her. And who is this?" "Are you Martin Miller's wife?" "Yes, for God's sake, yes, who's this?" "Mrs. Miller, this is the emergency room at North City Medical Center. Your husband was brought in about an hour ago, and we still have your contact information from an incident a year ago. He was in a car accident. Could you come over right away?" "Oh my God, is he okay?" "Snake, I'm not at liberty to discuss his condition over the phone, ma'am. Would you mind coming over?" "Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can." She ran upstairs where her daughter slept. Dallas, named after the city in which she was conceived, attended the local university but lived at home to save money. During her freshman year, she liked living in the dorms, but during her sophomore year, she decided that living near campus would not be conducive to her studies. "Dal, wake up!" Nothing. "Dally, wake up!" This time she got a gentle nudge on the shoulder. Still nothing. "Dallas, wake up!" Dallas sat up straight in bed and tried to focus her blurred eyes. There was a light on in the room. The night had been short. "Dallas, your father was in a car accident. He's in the emergency room. You need to get dressed. We need to go." Once dressed, both women drove to the hospital as fast as they thought it was safe. Dallas began inundating her mother with questions about what had happened, but Diane couldn't give any more information than she had already told her. It seemed like an eternity to them, but given the lack of traffic at this time of night and morning, the trip only took about 10 minutes. There was an empty space near the entrance, and Diana had parked the car at a slight angle, but that didn't faze her in the least as they jumped out of the car and headed inside. They were ushered into Martin's room in the emergency room, and they were shocked at his condition. He was well bandaged and clearly unconscious. They were given forms to fill out. Grief doesn't exempt you from paperwork. Dallas moved her chair to be closer to her father. They sat like that for about an hour before a man and woman in police uniforms entered the room. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were first on the scene with your husband. Any word on his well-being?" "No one has told us anything, officer," Diane replied. "Oh, this is my daughter, Dallas. We need to ask you some questions. I realize the timing isn't right, but it's best to do it as soon as possible." "Of course." "Do you know what your husband was doing during this time?" "That's the thing, he was home, and we went to bed together around 10 p.m. I didn't even realize he wasn't home until the hospital called." "Ma'am," Officer Stanton turned to Dallas, "can you confirm that?" "Actually, I can. We were watching a movie on TV that ended at 10, and then everyone went to bed. I saw Dad go into Mom's bedroom." "What movie?" the officer asked. "Something with Keanu Reeves in it. Some kind of action movie. Dad picked it out. It was his turn." "Did you have any particular problems? Financial problems, maybe? Or marital ones?" "Nothing that all married couples don't face. No special problems, no. I just don't understand why he drove off without my knowledge. The people in the other car weren't hurt?" "That's just the thing, Mrs. Miller. It was a one-car accident. According to both witnesses, your husband's car was driving normally and then accelerated rather abruptly and slammed right into the big oak tree that stands at the corner of Highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks, and no one remembers seeing any brake lights." Diane and Dallas looked at the officers as it dawned on them what they were implying. "Are you implying that my husband did this on purpose? That he tried to kill himself?" "We have yet to inspect the car for possible mechanical problems, and of course, we'll need to talk to your husband when he wakes up. But we're looking into that possibility as well. Are you sure there weren't any problems that you can think of?" "Officers, I love my husband very much, and we have a wonderful marriage. No, I don't see any problems. I'm sure he just lost control of himself or dozed off. It was very late. I'm sure there are reasonable Diana burst into tears and couldn't finish the sentence. Officer Stanton placed one of her cards on the table, asking them to call if they remembered anything else, and walked out of the hospital. Dallas closed the door to Martin's room for privacy. You didn't tell them? No, Dallas, I didn't, Mom replied as her tears subsided. It's none of their business and has nothing to do with it. Your father was fine with it. If he was, he'll say something when they talk to him. Then we'll cross that bridge. The next few days passed slowly for everyone. Martin was still unconscious. He had been admitted to the hospital, and Diana and Dallas spent as much time there as they could. They were there together often, but made sure he was never alone. Fortunately, Diane knew Martin's boss and called him to let him know what had happened and that he wouldn't be at work. She carefully avoided saying anything that might lead anyone to think it might have been an attempt on his own life. The accident happened on Saturday night, and on Wednesday morning Martin began to regain consciousness. By noon, his eyes were open, although because of all the medical equipment, he could do little more than look around. Diane, who was nearby, noticed this, walked over to his bedside and assured him that everything was going to be okay. A few seconds later, a nurse hurried into the room. Something on the monitors alerted her that the patient was awake. Diana returned to her seat to give the nurse a chance to do her job. Soon, another medical staff entered the room to check on Martin's condition. Seizing the opportunity, Diane went outside and called Dallas to let him know that her father was awake. Dallas didn't answer, so she left a voicemail. Soon, most of the medical paraphernalia was removed. Martin's left arm was broken, but he was right-handed and didn't expect it to hinder him much. His throat was sore from the tube, so he was given a whiteboard so he could communicate. The nurse read the message and asked if he was sure. Martin nodded his head. Aye. The nurse quickly went out into the hallway as the test continued. Mrs. Miller, I need to inform you that your husband has asked that you not be allowed in his room, and neither has your daughter. What? He's my husband. I have a right to be with him. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but the patient's wishes come first. Let me just talk to him, and we'll work it out. Diane tried to step around the nurse, but was never able to get any closer, so she resorted to shouting. Martin, 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 please talk to me. What's going on? Martin, Martin. Mrs. Miller, please stop yelling. You're disturbing our other patients. You can wait outside the room if you want, but if we catch you trying to enter the room or making noise, we will escort you out of the building. Do I understand? Yes, you're free to go, replied Diana, who had no other choice. 45 minutes later, Dallas finally made it to the hospital. She found her mother sitting in a chair at the entrance to the room. Mom, why are you here? Your father forbade us from being in the room. Both of us. I mean, I understand why he banned you, but why me? What the hell does that mean? And why did it take you so long to get here? I had just woken up when Bradley came by to see how I was doing. We kind of... Gee, you had fun with your boyfriend instead of coming to see your father? I'm sorry, Mom, but he was still unconscious when I left, Dallas replied in a tone that indicated she wasn't sorry. It was really stressful, and I needed to de-stress. It worked out great for what it's worth. When you get a chance, give me a call. No, Dallas, I'm not going to do that. And let's not talk about it now. It's disrespectful. The irony made Dallas chuckle. Next chapter. There was a knock on the door and a tall, very attractive brunette entered the office. She was dressed professionally, but not like a doctor, although her badge gave her away as an employee. Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the hospital's mental health specialists. How are you feeling? As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been 9 days since the accident. He had regained the ability to speak. The whiteboard was a thing of the past. He'd asked when he might be discharged, but had never gotten a clear answer. Until now. The hospital has asked me to spend some time with you. Is that okay with you? Do I have a choice? Not if you want to go home soon. I have to give you permission to be discharged, the psychiatrist replied, a puzzled smile on her face. Then let's get started. Dr. Lassiter pulled one of the chairs over to the bed and sat down, crossing her long legs. She looked over the folder she held in her hands for several minutes. So you were brought in a little over a week ago after an accident in which you collided with a large tree. I also see that you have forbidden your wife and daughter from visiting you, and I suspect these things are somehow connected. Connected, Martin replied. She has been unfaithful to me. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon these days, though it rarely leads to such a reaction. Perhaps there is something else. Martin was silent for several minutes. He didn't really feel like talking about it, especially not with a pretty female doctor. He wondered if they had some old man he could talk to. Dr. Lassiter waited patiently. It wasn't the first time she had to wait for someone to gather their thoughts to start talking. Her patience was rewarded. I suffer from depression, I guess. It's nothing that can be diagnosed. It's just, like I said, I've been depressed. About anything in particular or just in general? I couldn't. I couldn't do it. For a little over a year. Since the previous accident, right? Of course she knew. She probably had his entire medical history in her hands. She just wanted to make him say it. That's right. It wasn't even a terrible accident. I was in the back seat, my boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. We were hit from behind. There were no airbags or even really bad damage, but I wasn't prepared for it. I got whiplash and hit my head on the seat in front of me. I think that's what caused the accident. The report says you had a mild concussion and whiplash, the doctor interjected. My doctors couldn't explain that. None of the ED medication helped one bit. They ran a bunch of tests, some more than once. And the best explanation I got was that something happened, and part of my brain was damaged. So you couldn't do it, resulting in your wife becoming dissatisfied with your sex life, which in turn led to her having a lover. This eventually exhausted you and led to the events of that evening. Roughly? In a nutshell, yes. Said, and how long was it before your wife decided to take that step? 7 or 8 months, I think. I'm a little worried about it. Anyway, things were fine at first, but we were still hoping my abilities would come back. We talked about lying in bed all weekend and having a really good time. That, of course, didn't happen. Eventually, it dragged on so long that she decided to fulfill her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss this with you beforehand? No, I found out about it when I got home from work early. A hackneyed cliché, I know. What did you do? What could I have done? She was right when she said I couldn't do anything. It wasn't her fault I wasn't doing well, so she did what she had to do. And if, hypothetically, she had asked you beforehand, would you have said yes? You know, I've thought about this a lot, and part of me wants to say I would have said yes because I loved her and wanted her to be happy, but I don't think I would have agreed. We made vows, we made promises, and one of them was in sickness and in health. I wouldn't do that to her, so I couldn't accept that she would do that to me. Apparently, she kept seeing him. Obviously. And now that I knew about it, she became less restrained. I don't know if she started doing it more often, since I don't know how often they did it, but whereas before, it was limited to during the day while I was at work, now there were weekend trips to the store, and some of that time she was obviously spending with Bill. That must have been difficult. Difficult isn't even something that can be described, but then again, I didn't think there was anything I could do. She deserved a sex life and I couldn't provide it, but the whole thing was killing me. Tell me about the night of the accident. We were watching a movie on TV as a family. We still had those nights, those moments. I kept my pain, emotional pain, to myself. It was probably a mistake, but I didn't want to burden Diane or Dallas. They kissed and hugged goodnight, and I got a good night from Dallas as she walked off in a different direction. I think it was then that I realized that she had completely lost respect for me as a father and as a man. I could hardly blame her for that, for I had no respect for myself either. I was getting ready for bed as usual. Diana did the same. It was the same as always, every night, the same thing. I waited until Diana was asleep, then I got dressed, got my wallet and keys. I went upstairs and peeked into Dallas's room. She was asleep too. I kissed her and said goodbye. I went and got in my car. I knew it had airbags, but I figured if the impact was hard enough, it wouldn't matter. I didn't have a specific plan, I was just driving around the neighborhood. I was aware of a large oak tree, but it wasn't my immediate target. Driving past it the first time, I realized there were no obstacles and I could drive up pretty straight. I drove past it again and headed straight for him. For several minutes, they sat in silence, letting the story digest in their brains. Finally, the doctor spoke. Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for being so open and honest with me today. That's a great rarity. I'm going to let you rest for a while and take some time to think about what you've told me. Is it okay if I come back tomorrow? I'm not going anywhere, he replied. They shook hands and Dr. Lassiter left the room. Martin picked up his cell phone, which he had left at home that evening and which Diane had brought him before he had forbidden her, and answered several messages and emails, including messages from his boss. Then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Back at home, Diane tried to remain calm. She was under the impression that Marty was okay with her relationship with Bill, that he had given her a gift because he loved her very much. Even when she had first heard about the accident, she no longer believed it had been an accident. She had been sure he had nothing to do with it, but now she wasn't so sure anymore. She suspected that the police had talked to her husband, but she hoped he hadn't said anything about her relationship with Bill. The police never contacted her again, which technically wasn't considered a crime. Case closed. Still, he'd never objected. And if he had, she didn't remember it. Besides, she wasn't going to live in celibacy just because some idiot decided to finish off her husband's boss. That wasn't what she'd signed up for, and she wasn't going to settle for that now. When Marty got home, she'd try to be more considerate of his feelings, more reserved with Bill, but there was no way she was going to give that up. Next chapter. The next morning, Dr. Lassiter came as promised. She walked the same way, took one of the inconspicuous sturdy chairs, of which there were 2 in each room, and sat down. Marty watched her with interest. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Miller? Not much change from yesterday, Doc. Ready to go home, but I guess that's up to you. Partly, yes, but state law says you're detained for 72 hours, and technically that time didn't start until you and I started talking yesterday. So 2 more days at least. That's fine, Doc. At least the food here isn't too bad. It's always bad, they picked up together and burst into hearty laughter. Old but kind, remarked Dr. Lassiter. But I'm glad you're joking. So am I. For a long time now, and by long time I mean months, I don't feel like, well, myself. I used to be a pretty good joker, to the point where I sometimes got on Dallas's nerves. We didn't have bad thoughts anymore. We didn't go down dark alleys in our minds anymore. You know, Doc, no. I spent a year depressed, and the last few months I've been really depressed. I don't feel that anymore. It's been replaced by anger, frustration, irritation. At Diana and Dallas, more at Diana, of course, but mostly at myself, for failing to stand up for myself, to let my wife know that what she was doing was unacceptable. And now you intend to stand up for yourself? Absolutely. Although I admit I'm tempted to just file for divorce, I have to take some of the blame for letting her overstep her bounds. But if she's willing to stop seeing Bill, then I'm willing to see a psychologist and try to repair our marriage. I can appreciate your determination, Mr. Miller. I've rarely seen such a quick turnaround. I've had plenty of time to think as I lay here before you came. I am grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to voice them, to tell someone. It has allowed me to focus my thoughts. Excellent, Mr. Miller. Just excellent. In that case, I won't be late today. I have a few more patients than yesterday, so I'll be able to utilize that time. I'll stop by tomorrow for one last visit, but I don't see any reason why you won't be able to leave on schedule. Looking forward to it, Doc. Diana and Dallas were ready to pick him up when he was free. If he was going to try to get things back on track, he had to start by acting like everything was going to be restored. There was still healing to be done. The airbags had been surprisingly effective, far more effective than Marty had anticipated. Worst of all was the concussion he had received, which caused him to spend a lot of time in the dark, resting and relaxing. The TV was off, with gentle music playing in the background. His wife and daughter were caressing him. All was well for a little over a week until Diane announced that she needed to go shopping. No, Marty said calmly. What? Diane replied, perplexed. Marty, there are things we need, including some of your healing creams. Make a list for Dallas. She can go. Why are you dragging me into this, Dad? Besides, I have plans to meet Bradley. Then you'll have an incentive to finish shopping early, won't you? Diane, the list. That's ridiculous, Martin. You can't just come home and turn our routine upside down. Dallas has his own plans, and I'm going to the store. And that's final. Do you think I'm stupid, Diane? Stupid? No, Marty, of course not. Why would you ask such a thing? You think I don't realize that these shopping trips are an excuse to visit Bill? I've never come home with groceries, Martin. Not once. Yes, and it's a great cover. But you've been away too long, and not only that, but I can see it in you. By your eyes when you won't look at me. Buy your clothes when they don't look quite right. Buy your makeup, which is always a little messed up, at least by the time you spend with Bill, and that's gone. The shock in Diane's eyes was obvious, and Dallas suddenly felt a little more respect for her father. Marty, please, we've been over this before. I'll try to be more careful now. Obviously, I've been too relaxed in my meetings, but I'm definitely not giving up on him. So our vows mean nothing. Renounce all the others? In sickness and in health? Well, that covers sickness, and you won't renounce the others. But you will do so starting today. You're going to stop seeing Bill, and we're going to see a therapist to repair our marriage. Or you won't do it, and we won't do it, and I'll call a divorce lawyer on Monday. You're not going to do any of that, Martin Miller. Don't you dare threaten me. If I could do it with you and only you, I would. But I can't. And it's not my fault. I didn't cause the accident. I wasn't even there. All of a sudden, because I had nothing to do with it, my sex life is gone and I'm supposed to just accept it? That's not going to work. So I'm going shopping, I'm going to Bill's, and I'm going to get my needs met. If you want to talk about it tonight, we can do that. But don't you dare think you can dictate to me what I can and can't do. Without waiting for a word from her husband, Diane walked out the door and shut it with a clatter. The silence was deafening. Father and daughter looked at each other, and then Marty retired to his bedroom. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller worried about the future of her family, her parents' marriage. Her father had never stood up to her mother, but nothing serious had ever come between them. But deciding it was between them, and there was nothing she could do about it, she cleaned herself up and went to meet Bradley. Next chapter. Damn it, Dal, what's the matter? Bradley asked disappointedly. I'm sorry, Bradley. I'm just worried about my folks and I can't stay in this mood. Come on, baby. Let's have some fun. It'll take your mind off them. Jesus, Bradley. Haven't you ever thought about anything else? Hell, we don't do anything else but have fun. How about taking me out on a date to distract yourself? How about bowling, or dinner, or miniature golf, or anything else besides what we're doing? That's fun and enjoyable. And I don't like bowling or miniature golf, so why the hell should I take you there? Bradley replied. A light finally went on in Dallas's head. You're right, you shouldn't. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going home, and it's over between us. Find someone else to do nothing with. Dallas walked out of Bradley's bedroom one last time, ignoring his pleading. Dal, let's go. Bradley was a good-looking guy, but she suddenly realized he was too young. He had no ambition or desire to further their relationship. He was just trying to finish college so he could get a job at his father's company, and she doubted he could accomplish anything more than a paycheck and a position there. Suddenly, the front door slammed. Damn that boy! How many times have I had to tell him not to slam the damn door? Bill said irritably. Relieved, Diane realized that she didn't like Bill, or really like him at all, and Bradley was a lazy slob. Next chapter. When Dallas returned to the family home, it was already dark outside. She found her father resting in his bedroom. A faint light came from the bathroom where the light was on and the door was ajar. She realized her father needed light, but none of the lights in the room burned so faintly. Dad? He stood with his back to her and didn't turn around, but he answered nonetheless. Dallas. I'm sorry. That got his attention and he carefully sat up in bed and turned to see his daughter crying in the doorway. For what? He'd stopped calling her affectionate words when he'd found out she'd helped her mother find a lover, and he hesitated to do so now, even though she was crying. He couldn't help but think it was just as much of a setup. Dallas stepped closer and stood at the foot of the bed. I'm sorry for what I did. I was just trying to help my mom, you know? She was so upset about what you'd been through and the fact that you couldn't. Their eyes met for a moment. Well, you know I couldn't. And Bradley's father went through the same thing after Mrs. Coyle died. Bradley says his father talks all the time about how much he misses her, especially the closeness. I thought they could take care of each other. I'm sorry, but I never thought about how it would affect you. Is that why you did what you did that night? Marty was surprised at such an unexpected revelation from his daughter. It might still be a hoax, but he had to take her confession at face value. If he'd been fooled, hurt, fooled again, then so be it. Mostly, I guess. I was still pretty depressed just because I couldn't, what I couldn't do. Father and daughter met gazes again, this time exchanging a brief smile. But it's over now, Dally. I won't do it again. I hope you won't. I still need you. Are you going to divorce your mom? I haven't made a final decision yet, honey, but I don't see any other way out unless she stops seeing Bill. But keep it to yourself. She has to change because she wants to, not because she's being forced to. Okay, Dad. I'll go upstairs. Oh, did I break up with Bradley today? Marty tried to hold back a smile. He'd never particularly liked the guy, but it surprised him because she seemed to have a crush on him, or once had. Why? Marty asked, surprised at this turn of events. Because, Dallas began, and then paused to think. Because my father once told me he wasn't good enough for me, and I finally realized he was right. I finally realized that my father was right about a lot of things. A smile appeared on Marty's lips as he realized that his girl had grown up a lot today. Dallas walked over to her father and hugged him, realizing that this was their first hug in a long time. They finally pulled away, smiled at each other, and Marty watched Dallas silently leave the room and go upstairs. No sooner had his daughter's bedroom door closed than Marty heard the chirp of Diane's remote lock locking her car. The good feelings that had just filled him with joy vanished in an instant. He lay down again and closed his eyes. A moment later, Diane walked into the bedroom. She had showered at Bill's, and Marty decided it would be best if she came back fresh, although they could both telegraph exactly what Diane had been doing. Could you help with the groceries? Is there really groceries here? Marty asked, rising to her feet. Yes, Marty. I told you I'd get groceries, and I did. Marty pulled the bags out of the car and unloaded them onto the counter. He noticed they didn't contain any refrigerated or frozen food, all to restock the pantry. He also found the receipt, and judging by the time she had left the grocery store almost 2 hours ago. Apparently, she had gone shopping first before heading out to meet Bill. Even though Marty knew she would, the evidence lying in front of him still hurt. After putting his things away, Marty silently made his way to the bedroom to lie down. He wondered if it was worth bringing it up again. There was really no point. Diane had made it clear what she intended to do, so the next question was his reaction. Something had to change. Did you want to talk some more? His wife asked in a tone that suggested nothing good would come of it. No, Diane. You've made your position clear. Diana's face and tone softened. She loved her husband and didn't want to lose him. He was still her best friend and the person she most enjoyed spending time with. She didn't think her own satisfaction should be an issue under the circumstances, and she hoped Marty would eventually feel the same way. Are you hungry? She asked, distracting him from his musings. No. I made fettuccine while you were gone. I hope you had a salad. You haven't been very good with vegetables lately. No, I didn't have a salad, but I did make spinach. Diana nodded approvingly and headed to the closet to get dressed. She had thought about getting back to the intimacy with her husband that she missed so much, but today was not the right occasion. By the time she changed clothes, Marty was already asleep, or at least pretending to sleep very well. Next chapter. The divorce hadn't gone smoothly. Diane was furious when she was handed the papers. Marty had been kind enough to send them to the house, and hadn't failed to point out that he was with Dallas at the time, having moved into the guest room, which was upstairs next to Dallas's room. Diane fought hard against the divorce. She hired a very aggressive attorney, and he made every effort. They even tried to have him declared mentally incompetent, citing a suicide attempt. Marty, anticipating that she would try something like that, and because he thought it was a good idea, went to see a psychologist the same week he was served with the papers. The psychologist he went to was highly respected and certainly not cheap. And when he testified that Marty was no longer at risk of suicide, the judge agreed and the case was dismissed. The argument could have gone on for a long time, but just when it looked like Diane was ready to give up, Dallas intervened. She let her mother know that they were wrong, that Diana's needs did not outweigh the vows and promises she had made. Life isn't always fair, and she must support her husband and suffer by his side. Dallas also made it clear that any further resistance would damage their future mother-daughter relationship, possibly forever. Faced with the loss of her husband and daughter, Diane decided she had no choice and dropped her objections to the divorce. The house was sold. Marty agreed to alimony for several years, knowing that a judge would award it anyway. Diane got herself a 2-bedroom apartment near work and was able to go full-time 8 months after the divorce, but the divorce left her bitter and angry, especially when Bill let her know it was over between them. It seems he had several other women he was having fun with, and Diane lost her attraction once she was no longer married. Dallas continued to go to school, alternating between being with both parents, though as time went on, Diane stopped playing the victim role and continued to blame Marty for the divorce. If she heard her mother say, if only he'd been more understanding one more time, she would have screamed. And Marty? Well, next chapter. Marty entered the dimly lit club around 10 o'clock at night. It was Friday night, and he just wanted to get out of the house. He just wanted to make the most of his time. He wanted to drink and maybe dance. He had been so unlike himself lately, and he wanted to change that. He sat down at the bar and ordered a rum and coke. As he sipped his drink, he looked around at the customers who were with him that evening and noticed a face at the far end of the bar that seemed familiar, but he couldn't find it. In front of her stood an almost empty wine glass. Marty shifted his gaze to her and thought for a moment, then turned away. He sat on the edge of consciousness for a couple minutes, and then it hit him. A small smile appeared on his lips, and he picked up his drink, carrying it carefully as he approached the woman. She looked up at him as he approached her. Dr. Lassiter? She looked him in the eye and studied his face for a while, but didn't immediately recognize him, and Marty thought he might have the wrong person. I'm leaving Dr. Lassiter at the hospital. Here in the real world, it's Vicky, but I'm afraid you've put me at a disadvantage. It's been quite some time, and I'm sure you've interacted with far more patients than I have with excellent psychologists. I'm much better at names than faces. Try me. Martin Miller. Vicky thought about the name for a moment, and Marty waited patiently for her to admit defeat. He was watching her closely, and if you asked him later, he'd swear he saw a light bulb go off in her brain. Ah, Mr. Miller. An unfaithful wife and a rather unexpected collision with a tree, if I'm not mistaken. You're not mistaken, and I'm amazed. We've only been in contact twice in a year, damn near 2 years ago. It's a gift. Would you care to join me? Marty sat back in his chair and signaled the bartender to fill their drinks. Thank you. My pleasure. So what brings you here tonight? Meeting someone? Marty asked. Trying to, Vicky replied, and the gleam in her eyes made her meaning clear. Really? I thought I remembered a rather impressive stone on your finger. Perhaps you do. It was a little before my divorce became final. I wore rings in an attempt to convince my ex-husband, that he really had nothing in common with a 20-year-old cashier other than a desire to invite one of her friends into his bed. I'm afraid I didn't succeed. My goodness, are they still together? This may surprise you, Mr. Miller, but since the divorce, I've completely lost interest in a relationship with Wayne. I don't have the slightest idea. Of course you do. It was a silly question. And please call me Marty, Martin, or even Jerk. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Marty. Okay, Martin, would you like to take me out on the dance floor? I'd love to. Martin asked the bartender to leave their drinks behind the bar, then took Vicky's hand and led her to the dance floor. It was a rousing number, and they quickly got into the rhythm. This song was followed by another fast song, and then a slower song began. All the while, they stayed on the floor, and on the slow song, they reached for each other. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck and his hands pressed firmly against her back. Being a guy, Martin immediately noticed the lack of a bra. They stared into each other's eyes for a while before Vicky rested her head on his shoulder. 2 slow songs followed, and they didn't break their embrace when the second one began. Martin immersed himself in the sensations of this beautiful, soft woman who smelled simply amazing. When the song died down, Vicky took advantage of the music's slightly lower volume to say a few words. Why don't you take me back to your place and do something? Martin took her hand and walked back to the bar, paying the bill and informing the bartender that they didn't need any more drinks. He didn't look surprised. She took an Uber to the club, they got into his car, and Martin headed back to the apartment he'd bought. It was small, but he appreciated that he no longer had to tend to the lawn. Vicky, maybe I'm asking a little late, but how much have you had to drink? It was my first glass of wine at the bar when you came in. Why? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women. Don't worry, Martin. They pulled into the underground parking garage and took the elevator to his floor. As soon as the door closed, Vicky immediately said, "Then take me to your bedroom." An hour later, they were about to fall asleep, but Martin had another question. Vicky? Hmm, do you think you're ready for another serious relationship? There was a long pause, and Martin was afraid he had made a mistake and scared her. He half expected her to get out of bed and ask for a ride home. There was no doubt in her attractiveness to him, and not just in her physical beauty. She was intelligent, and he enjoyed her company. Sure, it wasn't love yet, but she was the first woman he'd met since his divorce that he'd even considered. Why don't we talk about it in the morning? Sure. Good night, Vicky. Good night, Martin. Next chapter. Vicky woke up before Martin did. He seemed calm, so she just let him sleep. She showered and then went to the kitchen to see what she could make for breakfast. Martin's question before bed caught her off guard. Not that she wasn't attracted to him, but she was focused on having a good time. She'd been telling herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life, and to some extent that was true. She had a good job and great friends, so she didn't need a man. But to be completely honest with herself, she did want one. But would a decent guy even want her after she told him the truth? Martin was awakened by the smell of something cooking. He rushed into the kitchen and found her. I was going to take you out for breakfast. It's too late. You can take me out to lunch. Go take a shower and breakfast will be ready. 10 minutes later, Martin returned to Vicky in the kitchen just as she was arranging the plates on the table. There was an omelet, a few slices of sausage, and a piece of buttered toast. I didn't realize I had sausage in there, she said. It was hidden in the freezer. I hope it's still good. Martin took a bite from one of the slices and said it tasted pretty normal. Breakfast itself went relatively smoothly, and Martin took it upon himself to clean up the kitchen as Vicky had done him the courtesy of preparing the food. While everything was being prepared, they chatted about nothing, and as the last plate was put away in the dishwasher, he turned to Vicky. Are you ready to talk? Ready as I've ever been. Look, Vicky, I don't want to put you on the spot or pry into your business. If you're not interested in anything but fun, so be it. You don't owe me anything. I know that. It's just that I need to tell you something, and why don't we do it in the bedroom? I'll be more comfortable there. Holding hands, they walked to the bedroom. They sat on the bed facing each other. Martin, I know we only met last night, at least as people in the real world. I think you're a great guy, and I'm definitely attracted to you, but I need to tell you something. I told you that my husband left me for a 20-year-old, and it's true. But that wasn't the whole story. The main reason he left me was because I couldn't have children. He wanted a family and was looking for someone who could give him one. He didn't want to adopt. The fact that he didn't have children of his own, he saw as some sort of failure, and I was the reason for that, and no, I have no idea how he behaved after the divorce. I'm a guy in his 40s. I have a grown daughter. I wouldn't mind having kids, but that's no reason to divorce. I'm glad to hear that. Another thing I want you to know, well, at least I want to be honest, is that I'm not too proud. After my divorce was finalized, I wasn't feeling my best. I was getting older and had just lost my husband to a woman almost half my age. I'm 37, in case you were wondering. I was wondering, but there's no way I would have asked. They both chuckled slightly. I also felt, well, inferior is probably the most appropriate word. Truth be told, I didn't feel like a woman at all. How can you be a woman and not have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's how I felt at the time. So I decided to prove that I was a woman. And if I couldn't be a woman by having children, then I was going to be a woman by satisfying men. Many of them, and mostly anonymously. I called myself Angela and wouldn't stop going home with someone when I wanted to. This went on for months until I realized it was self-destructive behavior and started seeing a therapist. But even then I kept doing it, though not as often, until I finally reached a point in my life where I could stop. Isn't that what you were doing last night? Martin asked cautiously. He wasn't judging her or wanting her to think that, but there was no doubting that she had been a cougar on the hunt last night. Yes, it was. I still have feminine needs and I still go out occasionally to fulfill them. But while I used to usually go out with whoever asked me out first, now I'm selective. There were many evenings when I'd come home alone and, take care of myself. I suppose I should be glad I passed the test. You passed, Martin. You passed. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and to answer your question, I'd love to get to know you better, but I'd like to be honest about what I went through. I got tested and didn't get infected with anything. which was incredibly lucky. I don't need birth control, but I can provide a note from my doctor if you need proof. If you want to try it, I'd like us both to be tested and agree to an exclusive relationship. For several minutes, Martin sat in silence. Vicky waited patiently, but worried whether she had given him cause for concern about a possible relationship. Finally, he seemed ready to answer. Vicky, thank you for your candor. I know it must have been very difficult. I think I owe you the same. Our experiences are not entirely different. After my divorce, I was glad I had gotten through it, but I still felt depressed about my inability to perform. I had no idea how I was going to find a woman, and I was going to have to live completely alone. I had my own therapist, and he pointed out that as women age, many women lose interest in having fun, but I still felt I had to find a much older woman or wait a few years. When things seemed to return to normal, I was still out of sorts. And just like you felt like you needed to prove you were a woman, I felt like I needed to prove I was a man. I myself walked the streets a lot looking for women to bed, proving, at least in my mind, what a stud I was. I wasn't any more selective than you are. Some women were, well, let's just say I rode a few city bikes and slept with a lot of them. This went on for a while and I didn't have the same luck as you. I was awakened by gonorrhea. I also had to admit to my doctor that I had no idea what my partner's name was. We diffused the situation, and I began to focus on my behavior during therapy. Next chapter. The almost inevitable confrontation with Diane occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Their relationship was very strong, and Vicky and Dallas were getting along just fine. They still had their own apartment, but they spent every night together, and it looked like they were going to get married. They went to a club geared towards a more mature crowd. Music was played by a DJ, and interior walls separated the dance floor from the tables, allowing for conversation. Martin and Vicky enjoyed their drinks and chatted about this and that. The evening was going well, so Vicky was puzzled when Martin's smile suddenly disappeared and his eyes looked somewhere past her. She followed his gaze. Martin and Diana saw each other almost simultaneously. While Martin's face remained neutral, a smirk appeared on Diana's face as she headed towards the table. Even so long after the divorce, Diana had not stopped feeling bitter. She still believed she had done nothing wrong, except for not being discreet enough. But satisfying her needs at the expense of another man when her husband wasn't up to the task was definitely not on the list of wrong things to do. So when she approached the table, it wasn't her intention to be polite. "Marty, it's so good to see you," Diana said in a voice in which sarcasm was clearly audible. "Diane. Vicky, this is my ex-wife Diane. Diane, this is Vicky," Martin said, though he would have preferred not to. "It's nice to meet you, Diana. I've heard a lot about you." "Really? And I've heard absolutely nothing about you," Diana replied bitterly. "We're divorced, Diana. Have been for over a year now. My life is no longer your concern. Now, if you don't mind." Martin left the phrase unanswered, but there was clearly a hint in it that he was suggesting that her ex-wife leave them alone. "Oh, of course, Martin. I'd hate to interfere with your date, but Vicky, there's something I have to tell you." "And what is that?" Vicky asked, glancing at Martin and then returning her gaze to Diana. "You probably don't need to worry about it. We're divorced because he can't do it anymore." Martin watched Vicky's reaction carefully, and Vicky struggled to suppress a slight giggle. She addressed her next statement to Martin, raising her eyebrows. "Is that true? I don't think you mentioned it." Martin only shrugged. This was Vicky's game. Diane thought she had them in the palm of her hand, that she had brought discord into Marty's relationship, just as he had done to her and Bill. She was going to enjoy it. Her happiness, however, was short-lived. "That's good, it's working. But how is it possible? Have they found the problem? Have they found a cure?" Martin and Vicky remained silent, allowing Diana to only worry more. "Come on, Marty. This problem has ruined my marriage. I think I deserve to at least know what's wrong." The smile disappeared from Martin's face. "First of all, Diane, it was your antics that ruined our marriage, not my condition. I admit it made things difficult, but you made the choice, not me. Second of all, you don't deserve a damn thing. We're divorced and my affairs are my affairs alone. Come on, Marty. You can censure my choices all you want and I can't say you're wrong, but I wouldn't have made those choices if things were good." "Okay, Diane." The doctors kept running tests, but they have no idea why he started working again. He just started working. They think the problem from the first accident just takes time to fix. If you hadn't gotten sick with me, like our vows said, and been patient, we'd still be married. Diana opened her mouth trying to find something to say. This information shocked her. Martin had already considered pleading guilty to the incident with the tree, but thought Diana would claim some credit. She could claim that she was the one who had helped him regain his ability to function by encouraging him to hit the tree with his trickery, and that he was somehow indebted to her. Best not to go down that path. I can't believe it. God must really hate me. He just wants to be like everyone else, Martin muttered. What was that? Diana asked, flashing her eyes. Nothing. Nothing at all. Now you know. Would you mind leaving us for the rest of the evening? Diana stood pensive for about 30 seconds, then looked Martin in the eye. You're right, Marty. I'm really sorry. I was wrong to do what I did. I was short-sighted and selfish. I should have been stronger. I ruined a good marriage. I'm sorry. Diana turned and left not only their table but the club itself. Martin and Vicky watched her until she was out of sight, and they really felt sorry for her. Martin then turned to Vicky again. Let's dance, my love. Epilogue. Martin and Vicky were married 6 months after the run-in with Diana at the club, and little Ella was born about 9 months later. Wait a minute, you thought. Vicky can't have kids? Well, she can't. Let me explain. Martin and Vicky had only been married for a few months when Martin heard the words every man dreads. We need to talk. One Sunday morning, they were sitting at the table eating breakfast. Vicky's schedule was to make breakfast every Saturday, and Martin did the same on Sundays. Martin had noticed that Vicky had seemed preoccupied and distracted the last couple days, so when she placed a newspaper article in front of him in the middle of breakfast, he wasn't too surprised. What's this, sweetheart? Read it, please. Martin flipped through the article. It said that a guy named Wayne Jessup had been killed by police officers when they came to a call about a domestic disturbance. The article was dated about a month earlier and gave some details about the scandalous relationship between the dead man and his much younger girlfriend, who had a 3-month-old baby. It was a tragic story, but it meant nothing to Martin. Okay, I read it. So? Honey, Wayne Jessup is my ex-husband. Martin realized they'd never talked about him, except for that short story about why he'd left Vicky for a cashier or something. Wow, are you okay? How are you feeling? Of course, I was in shock. He was never violent when we were together, so it didn't make any sense. And I felt really bad that this young girl had to go through something like that. I agree. But what does that have to do with us? I didn't feel responsible, but I felt, I don't know, involved, I guess, like I should do something to help. Okay, Martin replied, wondering where this was going. You know the paper sometimes calls on me for research or statistics or whatever, for articles they're working on. So I did a small favor and asked them to contact her on my behalf, as a person and ex-wife, not as a mental health professional. I asked them to tell her that I was Wayne's ex-wife and would be happy to help her, and they gave her my contact information. I assume she called, got in touch with him somehow? Yes, she called. I've talked to her on the phone and even in person a couple times in the last few weeks. And you're only telling me this now? I'm sorry, babe. The first time I met with her in secret because it seemed like the best choice at the time. After that, I felt like I was betraying her trust. So I treated it as a professional matter. I knew I would eventually tell you, and here we are. Okay, what do you need to tell me? I assume this is the girl he left you for. Actually, no. That girl's name was Amy, and she dumped Wayne because he was pressuring her to have a baby, and apparently she didn't want one for a few more years, if at all. The Carly I've been in contact with is a different girl. Okay, so you've been socializing with her. Wayne started pushing her too. She wasn't sure she wanted kids either, but she liked the idea of having a family and thought he really loved her, so she agreed. But as soon as the baby was born, he started being rude and abusive to her, first verbally and then physically. A few times she let it pass, thinking it was just the stress of having a baby, but the last time it got really bad and she called the police. She figured they'd take him to jail to calm him down and they'd talk the next day. Obviously, that's not how it went down. When he found out she called the police, he started screaming and swearing and pulled a gun out of the dresser. She says she didn't even know he had a gun, and hid in the baby's room, thinking he was going to use it against her. The cop showed up a couple minutes later and he went outside to confront them. Carly was still hidden but could hear everything perfectly. Wayne started telling them to get off his property, that everything was fine and they had no right to be there. They tried to talk him out of it, but he must have pulled out a gun because Carly suddenly heard them yelling at him to drop it. Soon she heard gunshots. Carly lay low, not realizing what was going on. She came out when police officers started searching the house and calling for her. No one said anything to her, but she saw a body covered with a sheet outside the door and realized it must be Wayne. How traumatizing that must have been for her. I'm sure she still had feelings for him, and it was very scary to relive it again. That's what she said. According to the report, Wayne shot at something and even hit one of the police cars. They returned fire, and that was the end of it. A tragedy, just tragic, Martin said, not knowing what else to say. How's Carly now? She's fine. She's going to counseling. Not to me since I'm too close, but I referred her to someone. I think she'll be fine. They sat in silence for a couple minutes, mostly just silently contemplating the tragedy that had played out. Martin, there's something else. Somehow, I'm not surprised. The thing is, Carly doesn't really want to be a mother, at least not yet. But she's afraid of just putting a baby in the hands of the system. Babies get adopted very quickly, Vicky. She won't be there long. We both know that, but okay, I'm just going to say it. Carly wants me, I mean us, to adopt a baby. Of course, I told her I'd have to talk to you about it, but Martin, God, I want this baby so badly. Martin was shocked. There was no way he had expected to be a father again, both because of his age and Vicky's inability to have children. And here was another child, and an infant, possibly ending up on his lap. Vicky filled the silence. I spoke to one of the social workers and a lawyer at the hospital. They said that this type of planned adoption isn't very common, but it's not uncommon, and it's perfectly legal. Did you talk to other people about this before you talked to me? Martin, I didn't want to talk to you about it if it didn't work out. I wanted to get all the information before talking to you. And what does Carly want out of this? No money, if that's what you're thinking, although I'd like to help her get back on her feet. After all, she just lost her only source of support. All she wants is to stay in business. If not quite in Ella's life as Aunt Carly, then at least pictures and news while she grows up. Martin was silent for a long moment, going over all of this in his head. He understood every step Vicky had taken along the way, who she had socialized with, and how she had arranged everything. He wanted to go through it all with her, to support her along the way. How about agreeing to another 18 years? By the time Ella graduated from high school, he'd be in his 60s. Would he have the strength for that? The patience? Even as he asked himself these questions, he knew he would never deny Vicky what she wanted so badly. Martin, talk to me, please. Martin looked into his wife's big, beautiful, deep brown eyes. So what's the next step in her adoption? That's how Ella became a member of our family. Of course, it wasn't instantaneous. We had to go through a lot of bureaucracy, but eventually the adoption was finalized, and they became a family of 3, 4 if you counted Dallas, who adored her new baby sister. Martin and Vicky helped Carly get a certificate at the local technical college, and she got a job at a dental office. She has started dating a young man who is a patient of hers, and it looks like it may be serious. They see each other a few times a year, and during that time, Vicky sends pictures. Martin and Vicky are still happy and have no plans to have other children. Vicky manages to take Ella to the hospital daycare when she works and check on her several times a day. And Martin somehow finds a way to visit his wife and daughter several times a week. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.